So let's taste flight number 2. Up until this point, we've been talking about identity of village and and tasting wines that have been blended from different areas and different villages. Champagne, of course, historically has always been a blended wine, and this dates back to even before it was sparkling. Dom Perignon, who is credited with making champagne sparkling, almost certainly did not make sparkling wine, but he was renowned for his skills at blending. Yeah? And so, there's a very good reason for blending champagne. It's in this northerly climate, oftentimes you can make a more complete wine by blending different vineyards together than doing one vineyard on its own. But having said that, in the last 20 or 25 years, there has been this incredible proliferation of single vineyard champagnes. And some of them are more successful than others. Not every site in Champagne is capable of creating a complete champagne. But I think that what's exciting about this is it allows us to explore the terroir of the region in a way that we never were able to do before. So it allows us to really drill down into a more microscopic view of Champagne. And to me, as a devoted student of Burgundy, to me this is really exciting. For the first wine, we're going back to Auger. We're going back to Demiere-Ansit. And so this is, I believe this is the first release of their new single vineyard wine from a parcel named Neyrot. But so it comes from the same, the flight, in the first flight we had, the third wine was also from 2010, blended Blanc de Blanc. And this, so this is from 2010, but a single vineyard, yeah? And I think that when you taste this wine, you see the difference in expression. It's, I'm not saying that it's better. It's whatever. You might prefer one, you might prefer the other. But I think that the characters of the two wines are very different. This, in this wine, you can see that it's a much more individual expression. I feel like it's sort of like, it's like if the blended 2010 is, say, a string quartet, this is like just hearing the cello. It's, that's the impression that it gives to me on the palate. Also, I think that here, old vines and a very chalky terroir. This really shows off the minerality of Auger, and you get this almost salty impression of chalk on the palate, which I think is really fascinating. What's interesting is that both of the first two wines in this flight, they come from very close to each other. Parcels that aren't necessarily adjacent, but close. So the second wine is from José Dhont, from vines that were planted around like 1949, 1950, something like this. There's a difference in vintage here, so that's important to note too. 2010 was quite a cool vintage, whereas 2009 was a much warmer and rounder type of year. But at the same time, when like we were talking about before about identity and expression of Auger, I think that it's interesting to compare these two. I think here you see the warmth of the vintage, certainly in its ripeness. But like the Neyrot, you get this really intense expression of chalk on the palate. And that's what I really like about this wine, about both of these wines, really. So up to this point, we've tasted 6 wines that are all from the Côte de Blanc. But, of course, Chardonnay is grown all over the Champagne region. And, when we talk about Champagne, like, whatever, your sales rep is, coming and, like, bringing you a new Champagne, and they say this is 40% Pinot Noir and 30% Chardonnay, and the rest is Meunier. That kind of appears useful. But the thing in Champagne, as with any other wine region, is that these grape varieties can be very different depending on where they're grown. So, and this is something that I think we haven't really thought enough about in Champagne. What does it mean to be 40% Pinot Noir? Well, Pinot Noir from the Montagne de France, or Pinot Noir from the Aube, or Pinot Noir from the Vallée de la Marne, they all taste drastically different. So it's much more important to think about where these grapes are actually coming from than oftentimes than even just the variety itself. So I arranged this flight to kind of demonstrate that. The first 2 wines are from the Côte de Blanc, from Auger even specifically, but the third and fourth wine don't even come from the Côte de Blanc at all, even though they are pure Chardonnay. The third wine comes from the Montagne de France, and it comes from the village of Bouzy. Bouzy is one of the most famous Pinot Noir villages in Champagne. It's it's on the southern side of the Montagne de France. I'm sure all of you have seen, a map of Champagne. The Montagne de France is here, or well, the heart of the Montagne de France, the part that we're interested in, is here. The vineyards the vineyards lie on the flanks of the Montagne itself, which, it's called the Montagne de France. It's really like a big plateau. It's not like Everest or something, right? But the top of the Montagne is just high enough where vines don't really grow, right? It's just cool enough. So the vineyards are planted around the flanks, and this is the really great home of Pinot Noir in Champagne. But at the same time, there's a huge difference between, because it's shaped like a horseshoe, right? So there's going to be a huge difference between the vineyards that face north and the vineyards that face south, just in terms of character. There are very, very good vineyards on both sides, but their characters are completely different. So Bouzy is one of the most famous villages on the south-facing side, right here. And so the vineyards of Bouzy, it's this vast hillside that almost all of it faces due south. So it's very warm. It's one of the warmest terroirs in Champagne. And because of that, it's renowned as one of the greatest villages for Pinot Noir. So what's super unusual about this third wine is that it's a pure Chardonnay from Pinot Noir terroir. A lot of Bouzy, lies on, I guess there's, a lot of Bouzy has clay topsoils, that can be of varying thicknesses above the chalk. Usually not too deep, but that certainly makes a difference anyway. This particular vineyard, Le Mont de Tours, lies at the base of the slope, where, I guess somewhat paradoxically, in Champagne, you would think that the top of the slope would be chalkier and the base of the slope would be heavier soils. In fact, it's the exact opposite. So clay tends to exist on the upper parts of the slope, and as the slopes go down and into the plain, that's where you get much less topsoil and really really chalky soils. And so this vineyard lies down at the base of the slope, and very little topsoil, like super chalky. And so that's why, or that's, I presume, this is why Hervé Saves's, parents or grandparents or whoever planted Chardonnay here rather than Pinot Noir. But I think immediately, just smelling this wine, or immediately upon tasting it, you see that it bears very little in common to the first two, right? You can immediately tell that it doesn't come from the Côte de Blanc. In fact, I think if you were to be given this wine blind, I'm not really sure that you would say it's 100% Chardonnay. I mean, here is an instance where terroir is totally trumping variety. And for me, that's fascinating. And then that completely illustrates, the idea that speaking purely about variety in Champagne it only gives you half the picture. So as I said, the Montagne de France is, it's famous for Pinot Noir. And so it's this horseshoe, horseshoe of vineyards. In Champagne, there's conventional wisdom says that Chardonnay, or Pinot Noir likes south-facing vineyards in general, because Pinot Noir is a really fickle grape just to grow. And so it likes as much warmth as possible. So Pinot Noir really prefers to face south. Whereas Chardonnay really likes east-facing vineyards. So like the Côte de Blanc, for example, is the slope is really predominantly east-facing. And so in the Montagne de France, because you have this horseshoe, you have Pinot Noir planted in the north and Pinot Noir planted in the south. But at this area where it turns and faces east, even though this is really red wine soil, there are two villages, Ville-Marmerie and Trepaille, which are planted predominantly with Chardonnay. So the fourth wine in this flight comes from Godme, who is becoming one of the greatest grower estates in the northern Montagne de France. And so in 2004, he started doing a series of single vineyard champagnes, one from each variety. And so he owns some fantastic parcels in Ville-Marmerie, which is this Chardonnay village that faces east. And so he started making a pure Chardonnay from this vineyard called Alouettes, which is one of the great, it's one of the best terroirs in Villers, in fact. Some of you, I'm sure, know Arnaud Marguen, like the special club of Marguen. Not always, but very often, Marguen's special club is based on the same vineyard, Alouettes. So it's really, legitimately good terroir. So Godme, he's very much focused on viticulture. He's only recently been certified, but even prior to that, he's been working biodynamically. He works with various like tisanes and like plant preparations, these like homeopathic things. It's really fascinating to talk to him about viticulture. So again, like the Savès from Bouzy, this is Chardonnay from really what should be thought of as red wine soil, and because of that, again, it gives you a completely different expression than the Côte de Blanc. I think it's interesting to compare the last two wines as well. This one is made entirely in oak. It's fermented in barrique. So that makes a difference too. But I think just in terms of terroir, in terms of body and structure, you can see where the Bouzy is really south-facing. It's warm, it's rich, it has a more pronounced body. Whereas this, even though there's richness and ripeness and concentration and whatnot, it feels lighter because of that east-facing exposition. you know, and I mean the soils. Both vineyards have really chalky soils, and so I think that you feel that in both wines. But I think it's really that difference in body that strikes me when tasting these two together.